ladies and gentlemen, Julie Taymor. Alfred Hitchcock was talking about making Psycho, and he said you can't make a film like this without a sense of humor. Is that how you would you say the same thing about making this film?
Well, there's two ways to look at that. One is the process of making the film. You better have a sense of humor. It was not an easy film to get financed, to make, to distribute, so you better have a sense of humor. But the main thing about Titus Andronicus is that Shakespeare has a tremendous sense of humor. So it was obvious to me in the script when I read it originally as a play that the humor was paramount. That was very important in this dark, incredibly tragic story, that the humor is always there.
I read the play once, but it was a long time ago, but I know there's two scenes in the movie that were not in the original play, and that's the very opening and the very close.
That's right, yes.
I assume everything else comes from the play, although maybe
there's
some
the
of the
orgy,
special
there's all of the nonverbal scenes are obviously not in the play. So in order to make it cinematic and open it up, I had to conceive of those scenes and how to create the world and make it more vivid. I don't know if most of you know that I directed this off-Broadway with Theater for New Audience in 1994 at St. Clement's Church. And at that time, I didn't know Titus Andronicus. I read the play. Jeffrey Horowitz, the producing director there, offered it to me and said, this looks like the kind of thing you could do. And I was slightly horrified when I read this because it was shocking to me. The play shocked me. And I thought, I know why he asked me to do this. I had done Oedipus Rex. I had done, which you all know the story of Oedipus Rex. I had done Transposed Heads, which is about two men whose heads get transposed, cut off and transposed. I had done Juan Darien, which had, again, a lot of violence. And all of those productions, which had been theatrical, I had done a stylized version of violence. And finally, I read this play, and I thought, you can't do that with this play. First of all, there are so many acts that are of violence that if you totally stylize it with the red streamers, with, there is a lot of stylization in the movie, but my thoughts were that if you completely stylize it, yes, you get to the, where you can distance yourself in order to look at the action, but it doesn't get you on a gut level. And clearly Shakespeare, when he wrote this play, was working with all the other playwrights on getting a good audience. And this was The Potboiler. This was his most successful, popular play. This was his hit. And he understood the revenge tragedy, and he understood how that would really grab an audience. So I immediately, when I was thinking this as theater, wanted to deal with the violence on two levels and to unsettle the audience by never knowing on what level you would experience something, so that you don't become numb by the elegant beauty of the stylization, and you don't become numb from the visceral reality, which is what we do on television. But I also was struck by the fact that there are no solutions to this story. But when I came to the play, came to doing it as a film, I started to think about the point of view. Could I just tell this story the way it is? I mean, you can as Shakespeare, why not? On the other hand, the way it's rounded up at the end is very Elizabethan. It's not particularly, has not a lot of meaning for us now. And the idea of a child, this 12-year-old boy, watching his family go at it, watching these bloodlines, these tribes, these religious rites, this whole event. What is it that we put the children through? And what is the legacy that they're left with? So I took the young boy, who in the original play only has 2 or 3 scenes, the scenes where he speaks. The arc of the story is the child's. It's a parallel story to the actual story of the Andronicus and Tamara and her family. So he starts as an innocent, then he becomes a participant, and by the end, he has to be an active, he has to have choice. Again, as it relates to the theater, the other major symbol visually in this piece is the Colosseum, and how the child falls into the Colosseum. And we all know, everybody in the world knows, that the Colosseum is original and archetypal theater of violence. It's where violence has, as entertainment, was condoned. And you go to it, you pay, and you know what you're getting. So there was partly, in discovering this play, the idea of also playing with violence as entertainment. Now, when the child takes this child and tries to leave that arena, he goes through, it's all black, it's all night. And as he takes this baby, much the same way that he was carried into the arena by the clown, held the same way, he moves out on that long walk. And I was troubled. I thought, well, is this going to be sentimental? You know, I thought in this play, in this film, it's hard to be sentimental. I mean, it's not like it's overly gooey through the whole thing. So it felt that this was, for me, this is a very personal way of dealing with this story, but I didn't want to tell the story if I didn't have that one sliver of hope. We can tell all these nasty, horrific, barbaric stories, but what do you do with them?
Talk about, I'm going back to when I saw it the first time. It didn't have some of the special effects and the ending, but it also didn't have Elliot Goldenthal's music, which I think is terrific music. Could you talk about how you worked with him, what you asked of him, and what the music brings to this picture?
Well, Elliot and I go back 15, 20 years working together, so we have a shorthand. We've done a lot of pieces together, and he's done a lot of movies without me because this is my first feature. But he had done the play, so we had already started together on a play that had 2 trumpets. That's all he had on stage were 2 trumpets. And when this started to be filled out, fleshed out, we talked about scale and period. And what Dante Ferretti and Milena Canonera did with sets and costumes, Elliot had to do with the music. Costumes, design, music reflects character. So as you see, for instance, when Alan Cummings and the cars happen, this kind of boogie-woogie, this jazz feeling really supports the actor, supports the character. Of doing the music, Elliot, if he were here, he would tell you it was really awful to have a temp score here. You saw a temp score when you saw it. The temp score, you all know, is when I'm editing, I have to put something down. And I really wanted Goldenthal, so I used music from 10 of his other films, which is wonderful for me but lousy for the composer. It's a terrible thing to do because you fall in love with it, and then they have to repeat themselves, and they just can't stand it. And you end up truncating or castrating, or whatever you want to say, their creativity in a way. If I had used somebody else's music, it would have been easier. But because he had to do better than himself, it was a very difficult experience. And I think the next time we do a film together, I would want him to do the temp score. Even if it's just on samplers and something simple. I don't care if it's not fully produced, because I want him to be able to have that creative, you know, just a palette, an open palette to start from scratch.
This is a digression, but do you know the most famous temp score in film? 2001.
Yeah, right.
Because he actually commissioned a score, and then he decided he liked the temp score better, and he used it.
Well, that happens all the time. I mean, and most composers just really dread the temp score, unless they're lazy and have something to copy or follow.
Talk about working with Dante Ferretti. Now, he was the art director.
I love to work with great designers who are going to take me someplace I can't go on my own. And Dante has the ability, because he does a lot of opera and theater as well, to bridge the worlds of highly theatrical and very realistic. And I talked about the Colosseum, and I said, I want to blend time. If you go to Rome, Rome is a blend of time. You've got one layer of these ancient ruins, and on top you have these apartment buildings. It's stratified. So it wasn't a stretch to do that. Mussolini's government building, which is the big square Colosseum, Dante introduced me to that building, and he said, you see, in Mussolini's time, he wanted to recreate the glory of the ancient Roman Empire. And there it is. It's monolithic, it's terrifying, it's fascist, and it easily represents what is happening in the play. Design for me, scenic design, locations, they have to be mirrors of what is going on in the action, in the internal blood of the character. It has to be what is happening to them, the landscape of the character. So whenever I pick locations, it is for that reason, whether it's the crossroads, Titus is at a crossroads in his life, or the swamp. There are no places in Shakespeare, so you have to pick it. And going back to this time period, it was just ripe. It was right there in Rome.
Two more questions in that direction. How did you find Milena?
Through Dante. I had just won the Tony for costumes in Lion King. She said, well, why aren't you doing this? I said, well, first of all, when you're directing a film, it's impossible to do both. But that's not the real reason. I don't want costumes. I want clothing. And I felt that Milena could create a real world where these would be clothes that we could recognize, that people would wear, as opposed to a costume drama. That doesn't mean that there aren't places like in The Wedding where it's more extravagant, but still, these should be things that we recognize and we feel. And I think what drew me to her was her taste, her taste, that she would really understand the quality that these people would have, their own senses, as opposed to some films, and I won't name them, where it always, you look at the awards, there's always the most flamboyant costumes. I wasn't really interested in that. And with these designers, we had to lay down some strict rules. When you're blending time, you then have to have strict limitations, and the limitations, the palette. It was red, white, blue, and black, and grays, and metallics. And that's it, except for when the nasty green of the grass would just keep poking its way in. But it was really, without controlling that, it would have been just a complete hodgepodge. The red, white, and blue was almost the colors of the veins underneath pale skin. And there's something, whether you should feel that, I doubt it. I doubt it, but it is there. That was the idea, that I wanted it to be almost a black and white film.
Did you storyboard?
No. We storyboarded a little bit, but I didn't have good ones, and they weren't storyboarding. I had storyboarded to the nth power on Fool's Fire. We could only build what we storyboarded, but that was all done in sets in a studio, so you could total control. Here, when you're on location, it was very hard, because when you asked the very first question about humor, we had 5 script supervisors. So if you all know what that means, I had nobody who was there. One person got sick, one didn't speak English, and then one kept making a mistake on right and left. I mean, it was just chaotic.
If there's one minimum requirement for a script supervisor, it's knowing right from left.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of there's one scene you probably saw where we had to flip the picture.
I didn't notice.
I won't tell you.
We won't. All right, we won't tell. How long was your first cut?
Not long, because Françoise Bonneau is a phenomenal editor, and I think it was probably maybe 10 minutes longer.
Wow, that's
and we
very
edited
unusual.
very, very fast, 10 weeks.
Amazing.
Because she'd been editing the whole time, and we didn't have a lot of footage, because I didn't storyboard it, but I knew what I wanted. I knew I remember one of the actors thought I didn't know what the hell I was doing, because he kept thinking you're not getting enough coverage. But to me, if you're getting all that coverage back and forth, then you don't know what you're doing, because you don't know what and how you want to tell the story. The negative is you've got it, and then if you need to make cuts later, it's very hard to. If you don't have enough footage, you don't have enough coverage. But on the other hand, it tells the editor what's your style, where you want to go, how you want to tell the story. And especially if you're going to use camera movement. And there's a lot of decisive camera movement in this. And you can't edit into the middle of a camera movement if the concept is about coming in a certain way. You've got to take the full time.
Let me just ask about your work with the cinematographer. What did you tell him as you started preparation for this picture? Well,
I started with one cinematographer who didn't end up doing most of the film.
Okay.
So talk about Luciano Tovoli, because he shot most of the film and he's brilliant.
Did he come in as you were already shooting?
Yes.
Okay. Is it fair to ask why?
Fun experience. No, I don't actually want to go into it. It was
Okay.
an unfortunate thing that did not affect the quality of the picture.
Right.
So that's what was tricky about it. You know, you get into that situation, you're looking at dailies and you go, all right, do we make a change? And that's the most difficult thing. And Luciano was able to come in without any delays. And when he came in, he saw what I'd been shooting. We talked a lot about the quality of light. Because, you know, I mean, for me, coming from the theater, I know a lot about theatrical lighting, about side lighting, about rear, you know, all of that from theater. And I love it, and I love what you can do with lighting. Of course, I've never been in the experience where then it takes 3 to 4 hours to do the setups. And for a lot of these, like the kind of lighting when Hopkins is going to cut the boys' throats and you see this sort of skeletal, the light there, it's a lot of time. And I felt it was worth it. I had a lot of faith in him, and we got along very well, and he understood the kind of style that I wanted, the theatrical style of lighting.
We're going to try to pass mics around. This is a new thing for us. Yes.
They're very big here at Columbia in terms of directing and film, about being very specific with the visual details of your environment. You know, what does the hair look like and what sort of table, and the briefcase is exactly what. It's not just a coffee mug, but what kind and what color and what shape. So in your dialogue with Dante, how specific were you about the precise details of the environment, and to what degree was he allowed to just interpret and imagine? And maybe we can qualify it by just talking about the opening scene. What exactly did you tell Dante that room should look like?
Dante did these extraordinary drawings based on our talks and on the script. I talked about the chrome, the red chrome. I had done this in the theater, and I liked this idea of the those kinds of dinette tables, and I wanted that absolutely banal, everyday, familiar look that could be any time, that TV 1950s, 60s look of the kitchen. There's nothing else in the film like it that is definitely its own. But I have to add, what happened with Dante is he was also working on Bringing Out the Dead and was under contract to Scorsese, and I did not have Dante during most of the shoot. He came back a couple of times. We had a wonderful art director that he picked who ended up doing a lot of the interiors and the choosing of those kinds of details. Dante did extraordinary drawings, for instance, of the Senate with the big wolf head and the throne and what that would be. And we talked about Philip Stark and the mixture of those kind of hotels that you might see in Miami. And his genius is everywhere in it. And he sets the tone, and he did the larger drawings. And then the people who he hired, the art director, the props person, they worked with me very closely. And every day I'd go in the morning and I'd say this, that. For tomorrow or the next day, I'd get a host of props and have to either tell them what I want, and they'd build them. Cinecittà, which is where we shot, you have all of Fellini's craftsmen who are old men now. And it's a tragedy. No, I'm telling you something that I feel really sad about. The people who sculpted the big wolf head in Titus's house, you know, in the inner courtyard, or even his house, that's all created. That is on a real house, on location, and then Dante designed very clearly the facade. And we'd go up, and I couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was fake marble. It was so well done, all the scenic painting. If I could tell you what's set and what's real, we could go through it if you're interested. They're so brilliant, and nobody uses their crafts anymore. Nobody uses their skills. I mean, apparently all these old men took that gigantic woman to see if she floated, took her to a lake. I missed the scene. Wouldn't have that been a Fellini movie? To see these men carrying that woman with the big tits, you know, putting it out and seeing if she would float, you know. I heard it was a great scene. And the guy who was the scenic artist is in the movie. I loved his face. He looked like Michelangelo. So he's the wood carver in the wood carver shop. That is the scenic artist. And he told me that he can't get any apprentices. The young people don't care anymore, and they don't want to learn the craft of that kind of scenic painting. Because you know, the big banquet, the final banquet room, we were going to do that on location, and the room was too small, and they put together that room in a week or less than a week and made the paint crumble. And I work in the theater, so I work with a lot of great scenic artists, but the level that these craftsmen are on is another level altogether.
I had a question about the the screenplay credit. It said you wrote the screenplay, and it was based on Titus.
It's adapted from Titus.
It's adapted. I was going to ask you about that process and how you went about taking the play script and turning it into a screenplay.
Well, because I had done it as a play, the play is probably 3 or 4 hours long if you do the whole play. So when I had done it in the theater, I'd already cut an hour to an hour and a half out of it. So I started from there and then made more cuts, but not a huge amount of cuts, because I'd already gone through that process. For me, and this is very much, I don't like to criticize, I think it's one of his best plays, I think it's a genius play, but I think it's a pearl in an oyster.
What percentage did you cut, would you say?
Well, that's what I'm saying. This is what, 2:45? I probably cut an hour and a half out.
You didn't add any lines?
Oh, God, no. It's all Shakespeare. If I did anything, I might have changed one word to make it a contemporary word, or if I felt that it was just totally incomprehensible. But mostly it's not. There's nothing that's added at all. What is, not verbally, not in text. What is added is the visual, the scenes, walking down the street. I wish I'd cut that scene. I really wanted to cut that scene, I have to tell you. The scene where he's walking down the street, I loathe it, but I couldn't go back and cut it. I couldn't reshoot it. We couldn't afford to reshoot it, and I didn't feel like if I removed it, I didn't like going right from the scene before to the mausoleum. So I feel mixed about it. I mean, what I feel sad is that I didn't shoot it once without the prostitutes. You know, you get carried away, oh, aren't they cool, don't they look good, and then it's not right. For me, it's the one bad note. I don't want laughter there. And there's just no way to avoid it. And it's very nice looking, but it's inappropriate at that moment. He should have been on a street alone. I had another thing that was going on that got cut, so I said, all right, if you won't give me shop owners closing their stores with those, you know, in Rome how you have those metal doors that go like guillotines, that's what I wanted, was him walking down and having all the shop owners closing these metal grates, and it was too much money, so I said, all right, well then give me 3 prostitutes or something, and you know, I didn't go through the whole thing, you know, and Milena designed these wonderful, crazy-looking ladies, but they're distracting and they're not right.
I have a question about the scene when Anthony Hopkins is in the bath. Is that supposed to be representative of the death of Marat, the painting?
Yes.
And is the orgy scene supposed to be decadence of the Romans?
Yeah, I mean, the orgy scene, yes, of course, it's the other one, your first question is really, that's like a very specific reference.
Yeah.
And that's true. What is so strange about this film is that many of these ideas started in the theater. So that bathtub in the theater, we had no set practically. And that tub was first used for the men to, when they come back in clay, and I had the 4 sons and no more soldiers, they cleansed themselves in the water in the tub. Then the tub became the pit, and Bassianus fell into the tub. Then the tub became the bathtub. So it had a different kind of history. It had a different meaning. You're given a scene, he's writing, all you know is that he's taking the blood and he's writing in these books. That's all you know from the Shakespeare. And if you follow the logic of the journey of Titus from a metalled man of armor, and this will actually reflect on costume design, how we work together, and the idea here, that he starts out as what he thinks is invulnerable, and that is his vulnerability, is his rigidity. That's what his story is. That's his flaw, is that he is a rigid, narrow-minded man who cannot see past order, ritual, government, and so you can't say he's a bad man. He's doing his job. And as he moves, he becomes stripped. He goes from black to white, you know, through shades of gray. It's very, you talk about detail, every single thing is plotted out that way. So at that moment, when he comes out in his bathrobe, and I said, there's the other thing, as he moves, he also goes from formality, from grandeur and formality and period, to a guy in a gray sweater sitting at a table stabbing at flies. You know, lumpy, avuncular, you know, I mean, I wanted to make him human. And so he went through those stages, and finally in the end, he has the white terry cloth bathrobe, but it's not even as white as the chef's. I mean, it was that, so, oh, it's too white, make it less white, because we're going to the final chef's outfit which he creates. Now, he creates art.
Why art thou thus attired, Andronicus? because I would be sure to have all well to entertain your highness and your empress.
That actually leads me to something that I think is very exciting about the play, Shakespeare, is the parallel of Aaron and Titus, that they are mirror images of each other. Aaron is the other great character. Tamara, she's a great part, but that's not the other major, historically Aaron was the one everybody wanted to play, and often they dump Titus and just do Aaron, because he's such an amazing, amazing character. As Titus it does, the violent acts that he commits are done without any malice, without, there's nothing, he doesn't hurt or do anything because he wants to. Whereas that speech that Aaron gives on the ladder, I've dug up dead men from their graves, I've carved in their skin as on the barks of the trees. Everything about Aaron, about the violence that Aaron talks about and commits in the beginning is art. It's creating violence as art until the end. And as Titus goes in one direction, Aaron goes in another. Aaron becomes human as soon as he has this child. Aaron gives up his life for his child. And Titus, finally, he doesn't just kill those boys, he bakes them into pies. Now that's a very Aaron thing to do. And you kind of don't know where your loyalties, where you're feeling, which I think is one of the most brilliant things about Shakespeare's play. Who is the protagonist? Who do we root for? Well, thank God you don't know, because I find it absolutely boring to have to know who the hero is and then know that he's going to survive in the end. I mean, it's great to be unsettled. It's great to not know, oh, this guy, I mean, in the beginning, aren't you with Tamara? Look what happens to her. In the very first scene, she says such smart things. She says cruel, irreligious piety. 3 of the most brilliant words about what happens to her child. Somebody's going to sacrifice, my son for their religious ritual. What kind of religion is that? Irreligious piety. You're going, my God, she's beautiful, she's smart, she's not all dressed up, she looks great, she's in mud and dirt, she's, fantastic. And then she changes into this monster by the end, physically, emotionally, because vengeance destroys her. It eats her up inside. And with Titus, for the first 20 minutes of this film or of the play or whatever, you can't stand the guy. I mean, what's to like? And yet after that, you start to root for him until you're cheering for him by the end when he's committing the most heinous crime. So it's interesting how it plays with you emotionally.
You've talked a lot about what you discovered while making the film that you hadn't discovered when you explored it in theater. I'm interested in what limitations you found in making the film. Were there things that you found impossible to convey filmically that you might have been more clear about in the theatrical?
No, I have to say honestly, I think the film is better than the theater, and I love doing Shakespeare on stage, but there are certain things that I think why Shakespeare lends itself so well to film is he wrote movies. And you can, in the theater, it's tremendous because theater is abstract, and you rely on the imagination of the audience to fill in the blanks. That's what makes it a very high art form, very poetic art form, because you don't have to have it be a literal medium. The audience knows you're not on the savannah of Africa, so why do you can put the grass on the heads and you can create the wind and you make the audience complicit. Film, and even more so because of television, has become so bloody literal that everything has to be very clear. On the other hand, when you're in a language, when you're doing a language like Shakespeare, if you can have a close-up, if you can see the lips, you can understand it better. And actors don't have to project. So there's a certain kind of, I think Hopkins has this unbelievable range of emotions, but it's very natural. He can be under his breath, and you're right there, and I think it allows the audience to comprehend the language. So you can support the language very well in a film. We had 12 people when we did Titus Andronicus off Broadway. When I did the final killing scene with the boys, we had columns. The set was pretty much a bare stage with plastic columns that had black and white photo blow-ups of Roman columns on the plastic. Does that make sense? It's like, so you had the ancient and the modern. The material was plastic and grungy and shitty and decrepit and all, but you had the quality of Rome by the photos. And you could see through them when Titus was walking down in the movie, the crossroads, I put people behind all of the columns and they just moved. So the symbolism of them being stone columns was already set in motion. When I went to the film, I went, all right, well, I'm not going to have columns moving. They're people, but I don't want to see faces. So the idea is still the same, that they are without faces, they're bodies. He's a salmon moving upstream. They have no personality. But that's a literal, I had to do it in a literal way. I had to find it.
I'm enormously impressed by this movie, as I think everybody else is, but one of the questions that it gets very hard to formulate by the time you watch this is some sense of what the overall world is that you think that you've created here. If you're in Shakespeare's world, there's that notion in the background all the time when violence is going on, that there's some pattern of good and evil playing itself out, and that there's a hint of redemption always at the end.
I feel that, here we just went into the year 2000, and this begins at the year 1. We look and we say, are we any different with all of this modernization, with all the computers, with all of the communication that happens? The events around the world are so identical always and forever that have to do with the difference between justice and vengeance, and that question of the fine line between them. Do we cry for justice or we cry for vengeance? What's the difference between those two things? I mean, this is the greatest dissertation I think ever written on violence, ever. I think he's touched every single kind, starting with war, which we condone. Well, nobody cares, Braveheart, okay, these big movies that have war, whatever, we don't say they're violent movies because they're about war. Good, you have to go off and fight a war, but if you're on the other side, your baby's killed, your son is killed. So, and I'm not saying you can't have war either. It's just, this is the investigation. Then he goes into ritual violence, which has to do with religious. And you look at Muslims and Jews and Christians and the Crusades or whatever it might be, and it's all happening now. And then you have father to son disobey, or a kind of domestic violence. You get into an argument, what do you mean you're not going to do this? Blah, blah, blah. The gun comes out, boom, somebody's dead. Not intentionally. He didn't intend to kill his son. It happened in a fit of passion. Then you have the lust of the boys. Now those boys, Littleton was happening all around this. Or when I first directed this, the Menendez brothers, or the rape in Central Park, or the wolf packs. It's constantly there. All of this is constantly. And when you're doing a play like this, you can't help but be very receptive to every event. Everybody looks like they're in the play. Go on the subway, and everybody's a character in the Shakespeare play. I mean, you all know if you're doing a play, everybody, oh my God, they're all over the place. So, and then it just goes on, and then you have nihilism. Now, that is the one that I think is the most extraordinarily contemporary, which is Aaron. And you can completely understand this man in the present now, with young guys who are or people who are so disaffected, disconnected, that they don't give a damn about their future. I mean, there is no future. And you understand why, or whether it's existentialism. It's a very 20th century concept. And Aaron is shocking when he says that last line, my only regret is that I didn't do more. But the end of Titus Andronicus, like the end of The Tempest, I don't like a lot of the ends. The ends of those plays are there to round it all up in almost a political way for the time. And I don't really necessarily feel they reflect the soul of the piece. I think that this is an angry young Shakespeare writing here, trying to do a commercial play in the style of the good revenge tragedies. I think you get someone who is very aware of human fallibility and could play with all these beliefs, as he does in all of his plays, but truly understood the depths of human nature.
You've given us an amazing evening, and I hope you'll make a lot more movies and come back again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.